The hostess barely glanced up when I told her my name. Corner banquette, Mr. Hale. She led me past a row of brass lamps and a wall of framed opera posters to a table that looked out on the street. Outside, the rain had rinsed the city to a gleam. Inside, Veluto smelled like charred lemon and rosemary, the kind of scent that tries to make every argument sound civilized. I arrived early on purpose. 8 years of marriage to Mara had taught me that arriving early buys you a sliver of quiet before the story picks you up and runs you over. The waiter Elena stitched in neat thread on her apron set down a short glass of rye and a carafe of water. I took one sip and breathed through it. We met at this same restaurant the week my firm Northbridge Advisors signed our first mid-sized developer. Mara was then a temp who rescued a misfiled contract, and by the end of the month, our lives had tangled the way paper clips do. One casual gesture, then forever linked. She stayed, became our project coordinator, learned the clients by voice. We bought a narrow house with a crabapple tree out front and a roof that creaked in a friendly way when it rained. Most of the mortgage left my account, but it was ours in the deed and in the retelling. At 7:19, the front door opened and Mara walked in with a man I'd never met. Tall, gym-fit, fashionable stubble, the kind of good posture men practice when they know rooms will read them. She had chosen her plum dress, the one with the delicate scalloped sleeves, and she was smiling in the bright, flat way you smile before you say something that will break furniture. "Elijah," she said, as if she were introducing me to a cousin at a reunion. "This is Cole Rhodes." "Hi," he added, offering a hand he didn't seem sure he wanted to offer. "Take a seat," I said, and they did. Mara across from me, Cole beside her, as if they were a unit, and I was the witness. Elena returned, collected a flicker of recognition, and asked about drinks. "A Barbera for me," Mara said. "He'll have the same." She didn't look at him to confirm. We let the first silence pass like a trolley nobody needed to catch. I folded my hands and waited. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way she always did when she rehearsed a line in her head. "I've been thinking about us," she began, eyes steady. "About how routine settles like dust. I need latitude. I'm opening our marriage. I want to see other people." There are declarations that ask for debate and declarations that arrive already notarized. This one had the stamp marks. Cole shifted and the practiced posture trembled. He glanced from her to me to the sconces to his empty place setting. "Open," I repeated, as if the word itself needed proof of life. "Open," she said. The second time sounded smaller. I let the breath go. Before we widen any definitions, a small clarification. I turned to Cole. "Did Mara tell you she's married?" He looked at the tablecloth, then at me. "She said you were separated." "Separated," I echoed. "Interesting." Mara's smile thinned. "Eli," I raised a finger. "Give me a second." I slid my phone from my inside pocket, opened our scheduling app, and turned the screen toward them. Project Orion Roads Development Cascada Residences. Cole, that's your company. Every meeting logged. Dates, times, addresses. Cole leaned in despite himself. The list had its own kind of gravity. Some entries were lunches. Some were off-site consultations. A few bore hotel names every downtown professional knows too stylish for a conference, too private for a client review. The policy at Northbridge, I went on, prohibits personal relationships with active clients during engagement. Conflict of interest. It's in the handbook Mara helped me revise last year. Mara's voice found a hard edge. "You're making this ugly." "It was ugly when this calendar started matching the hotel invoices," I said, keeping my tone level. The rye helped. So did the fact that truth, once it gathers momentum, doesn't need you to push very hard. Elena returned with the wine, and the 4 glasses on the table made us look like people at the beginning of a celebration. "Anything for you, sir?" she asked Cole. "Water's fine," he murmured. "Cole," I said. "Did she also tell you about our mortgage, the joint account, the payroll she signs as my coordinator?" He blinked. "She said she was mostly supporting herself." "Mostly," I repeated. The numbers would disagree. Mara set her glass down with a soft clink. "Stop performing. We can talk about this later." "We are talking about it now," I said, because open is a word that comes with disclosures. And if we're discussing open, let's open the file. The corridor of the restaurant seemed to pull tight the way places do when truth refuses to stay discreet. A couple at the next table went abruptly quiet. Somewhere near the bar, ice cracked in a shaker like an answer. "Elijah," Mara said, adding a shade of warmth that used to make me buy flowers. "We've grown. I want exploration. It doesn't mean I stop loving. Please don't edit me into a footnote, I said. We can save language for contracts. Cole tugged his napkin into a rope. Look, he said, eyes on Mara, you told me you two were done. You used past tense. We are, she insisted. Emotionally, we're… I held up the phone again, companionable as a ledger. Emotionally is not legally. And not professionally. You're logged on the Morrison account tomorrow at 11. If I ask, the notes will say, site visit. If I ask the elevator cameras at the Mondrian, they'll say, suite level 430 last Thursday. For a moment, the three of us watched the screen glow on the white linen. The phones at other tables buzzed with the low, universal hum of other lives. Outside, headlights dragged thin, bright lines across the wet pavement. Enough, Mara whispered, though she meant it for me and maybe for herself. You're humiliating me. No, I said. You walked in with humiliation already zipped into your dress. I'm just declining to pretend the fabric is invisible. Elena hovered, read the weather of the table with professional speed, and asked if we were ready to order. We'll need a minute, I told her, and she melted away without judgment. Cole's jaw worked. He looked suddenly younger, like he'd taken a wrong hallway at a courthouse. I didn't sign up for this, he said, meaning the policy, the logs, whatever version of consequences he'd thought only happened to other people. Mara, she reached for him, then thought better of the theater. Cole, she said, trying the name like a lifeline. He stood, napkin falling to the floor like a spent flag. I'm out, he said, almost apologizing to the air between us. I can't be part of your marriage or his company or whatever this is. He left without waiting for his wine. The door closed behind him with the soft punctuation of a well-oiled hinge. The restaurant's sound returned forks on china murmurs, the scrape of a chair. Mara stared at the water glass as if it might offer her different physics. I could see the moment she began to rewind the evening to find the alternate path she hadn't taken. Elijah, she said, voice hoarse now, we can stop, I said. We can stop pretending words like open are elegant solutions for messy appetites. We can stop writing our vows as footnotes to client files. Her mouth trembled, then snapped shut. She folded her hands in her lap, a chapel of fingers. I finished my rye, left the glass far enough from its coaster to make the ring obvious, and rose. At the host stand, the check waited with a little tent card that said, congratulations. The irony felt lazy. Put it under Mara Lang's tab. I told the hostess, polite as a late train. Table by the window. Outside, the rain had softened into a mist that turned streetlights to halos. I stood a moment under the awning, let the damp collect on my coat, and then walked toward the curb where my car idled by a hydrant. The wipers ticked in measured arcs. I sat behind the wheel, rested my hands at 10 and 2 like an obedient driver's ed student, and watched the door of Veluto through the sheen on the windshield. She didn't appear. The crabapple tree on our street would be dropping fruit by now, leaving bright bruises on the sidewalk. Somewhere in the city, a bell marked the hour. I put the car in gear and eased into the thin, glistening traffic, the taste of rye and rosemary still clean on my tongue. By morning, the rain had traded places with a thin, colorless light that made the kitchen look like a room staged for a listing. The crabapple bruises on the sidewalk were already going to seed. I stood in my suit jacket with a mug cooling between my hands and listened to the house breathe, the radiator ticks, the small sigh the back door made when a draft touched it. Habit carried me down the steps into the street along the familiar corridor of elms toward the garage. Habit is sturdy until it isn't. Archer and Bell kept a corner suite on the 12th floor of a building that pretended to be older than it was. The elevator smelled faintly of dry cleaning solvent and citrus. A receptionist with geometric glasses brought me into a conference room where the city spread itself to the river like an argument. Rowan Archer arrived with a legal pad and a pen that clicked once and never again. You look like you slept as well as I did, he said. I slept in a car with the seatbelt around my chest, I said. The seatbelt won. He sat elbows square on the table and listened without interrupting, while I gave him the play-by-play, Veluto the name on the reservation Mara in the plum dress Cole Roads, the word open like a door banging against its frame, the logs, the hotel names that don't need adjectives, my company's policy which Mara had helped write when we were still finishing each other's emails. Rowan's pencil made a quiet, relentless path down the page. All right, he said when the room had absorbed our voices. "We're filing for dissolution and asking for temporary orders today, asset preservation joint account oversight status quo, mortgage payments. We'll request a no-contact provision limited to your clients and your workplace until we've sorted out the interference questions. Separate from that, you'll report the conflict to your HR director. Petra." Petra, he repeated this name going onto the page. "When you talk to her, you give her facts, not adjectives. If there are receipts, give receipts. If there are logs, give logs. If there's anything in writing between Mara and Cole that strays into business, give it a flag. I have meeting entries, location pings, expense lines on her card. Dinners labeled as consultations. A sweet line at the Mondrian. Good." He didn't smile. He rarely did when the news favored his client. Judges like paper more than outrage. HR likes it even more. He slid a sheet toward me already typed, as if he had expected my life to arrive on a Monday. My signature looked neat in the morning and uncertain by afternoon. I signed while the neatness could still pass for conviction. Petra Quinn ran our HR shop the way a good librarian runs a rare books room, by believing rules protect value, not suffocate it. Her office looked inward onto a light well and outward onto a wall of policies printed on thick paper and framed as if they were landscapes. She wore a dark dress and a small copper pin that resembled a folded leaf. I knocked. She looked up. "Elijah." "I need to report a conflict," I said, closing the door behind me. "Who's—" "Mara Lang, with an active client. Cole Rhodes of Rhodes Development." I placed my phone and a thin folder on her desk and stepped back as if I were setting down a delicate instrument. She didn't touch anything at first. "Tell me what you believe and what you can prove." "Believe a personal relationship concurrent with our engagement on Cascada residences." "Prove meeting logs that map to expense reports." "Hotel invoices charged to a company card." "Calendar entries labeled as client consultations that coincide with locations and times inconsistent with business." Petra unfolded the folder, the way people open letters from long-lost relatives, careful, but ready for a disappointment they can catalog. She paged through screenshots, timestamps, addresses, receipts cropped to dollars and dates. She checked the headers for consistency, and the footers for anything that looked decorative. She made notes in a compact vertical hand that left room in the margins for more bad news. "Policy language," she asked without looking up. Section 6.3. Conflicts of interest. Section 6.7. Use of company resources for personal purposes. Section 9.2. Client relationship standards. She nodded once. "I'll open a formal inquiry. You'll get a notice because you're the reporting party and Mara's supervisor of record for the Cascada line. I'll need access to her email and calendar. It will provision that. I'll ask for transaction detail on her corporate card. If we substantiate any of this, we'll proceed to disciplinary action." How long? 72 hours for a preliminary finding. That timeline doesn't exist for vengeance, Elijah. It exists so we don't poison the well with rumor. "I don't need vengeance." "I know," Petra said. It wasn't comfort and wasn't a test, it was a notation. When I left her office, the hallway rang with ordinary things. The flap of a file in transit, the soft mechanic's cough of a printer, the burr of a phone on somebody's desk. The Cascada model foam board and balsa sat on a credenza, its little balconies catching light as if they could keep it. I stood a moment to see whether my steadiness would return if I stared at right angles. It didn't. Before noon, my desk phone lit with a number I didn't recognize. I let it buzz to the brink of voicemail and then took it. "It's Cole," the voice said, stripped of the swagger it had tried on at Voluto. "Rhodes, do you have a minute?" "I do." "I owe you an apology," he said. And I could hear him choose the words with the care of someone unscrewing a jar without knowing whether it's under pressure. "Mara told me you two were separated. She made it sound like paperwork was a formality, like you were both moving on." I believed it because it was comfortable to believe. I watched my cursor blink at the far edge of my screen. "Comfortable beliefs are cheap," I said. "I know that now." "She came by my office this morning," he went on, and it was like the version of the story changed to fit the room. Moving in. Combining things, deadlines that were never mine. I told her I wasn't that person to her, and she said I was a coward and that you— He stopped the word hanging. "It doesn't matter what she said. I'm calling to make it clear I'm out. Out of anything that looks like more than a business relationship. Out of any arrangement where I'm collateral." "You made a wise decision," I said. The words sounded like a lawyer's, but they were the only ones available that weren't a sermon. "I'm canceling my next meeting at your office," he added, not as a gesture, because it's the right thing given circumstances. "I'll have someone else cover the handoff," I said. "We'll keep it dry. Scope milestones, nothing more." "Thank you," he said. And in the pause after it, I could hear the little clicks of his thought adjusting to a reality without Mara in it. For what it's worth, I didn't know her like I thought I did. "Neither did I said, and we let the line go silent together. By mid-afternoon, Petra called me into a small conference room, where the glass had been frosted up to shoulder height, as if secrets were taller than people, but shorter than trouble. She set a thin stack of pages on the table spine-aligned tabs sprouting in pale flags. "Preliminary," she said. "Email review shows personal messages to Mr. Rhodes during business hours, some with explicit non-business content. Calendar audit corroborates the location data on your screenshots. Corporate card records show charges at the Mondrian and the Barclay billed on dates that match entries labeled as client consultations. Policy sections 6367 and 92 are implicated." "Implication is a polite word," I said. "Polite words are how we keep work from becoming a bar fight," she said. "Mara has been notified and asked to attend a meeting at 4:45 to respond to the findings. You're not to be present. If she announces resignation, it will be accepted. If she disputes the findings, we'll escalate to termination pending final review. Security will stand by to escort her for retrieval of personal items." "She'll say I'm making this happen," I said. "She'll be wrong," Petra said. "I am." At 4:47, I heard the elevator exhale and the not-quite-hasty footfall of someone who wanted to look like she wasn't late. 5 minutes later, the conference room door clicked. I didn't press my ear to drywall. That version of me belongs to other lives, but I stood at my window with a legal pad I didn't need and watched a front of dark weather build over the river. Now and then, a voice carried down the hall flat with effort or thin with anger. The sound of policy being read aloud has its own meter steady as the heart of a patient machine. At 5:23, Petra emerged and behind her Mara in a careful, furious silence. Petra walked with the small, precise nods of a person who respects the gravity of rituals. Mara kept her eyes forward as if the floor had become a runway, and she had committed to this stride long ago. She stopped before my office doorway. "You did this," she said. I reported facts, I said. "You've always loved your files," she said, and her lips made the sentence look like it hurt. Petra stood a pace behind her. "Mara, let's collect your things." Mara's eyes flicked to Petra, then to me. "You think this changes who you are?" she asked. "It just underlines it." "It underlines the policy," Petra said, not raising her voice. "Come with me." They moved down the corridor together, a supervisor and an employee in the last seconds of that relationship. A security officer I'd seen a dozen times and never truly noticed stood by the elevator with his hands folded. When the doors closed, the lobby swallowed the moment the way lobbies always do by pretending nothing happens there. I left the building by the side exit. The air tasted metallic. On Fulton, a violinist played under an awning as if rehearsing how to forgive the weather for being itself. I walked without deciding where the walk would end until my phone vibrated with a number labeled private. For a manufactured instant, I let myself imagine it was the past calling to say it had made an error and wished to be corrected. It was not. "Elijah." A woman's voice said, older than mine, and still carrying the timbre of someone who teaches people to find the door without waking the house. "This is Evelyn Lang." "Mara's mother?" I said quietly. "Yes." There was a precise wobble to the word, as if it had been carried down a hallway of closed doors. "Do you have a moment?" "I do." "Mara said she'd—" The sentence stopped, folded, found another route. "She said things that don't line up. She says you're controlling and vindictive and that you never let her breathe. Then she says you left her stranded at dinner and humiliated her in public. Then she says none of it matters because your marriage is over and that's how you wanted it." Cars moved past in a slow belt, each a small weather system. "We had our anniversary dinner last night," I said. "She arrived with a client of ours. She told me she was opening our marriage." I said no. I presented evidence of a personal relationship that violates company policy. I reported it to HR. Today, HR conducted a preliminary review and acted within policy. The quiet at the end of the line arranged itself into a chair someone sank into. Thomas is here, Evelyn said finally. He doesn't know what to do with his hands. We raised her to be… She stopped again and did not replace the words with softer ones. We didn't raise her for this. I don't have an interpretation to offer, I said. Only facts, and none of them are kind. We're not calling to pick a fight with you, she said, and the steadiness returned the teacher re-inhabiting the woman. We're calling because we don't know how to speak to our daughter without making everything worse, and because you have always spoken in complete sentences. If we ask for the simple truth, we trust you'll give it. I gave her the simple truth. Not the decorative parts or the metabolized resentments. Not the tender backstory of how Mara and I were good at being a team until we weren't. Just the essential sequence of events and the policies that cradled each step as if the rules were the only furniture in the room. Thank you, Evelyn said when the story had no more pages. We will take care of our side of the street. If she reaches out to you, please let us know. Not because we want to monitor her, because we want to believe there's still a way to get her to sit in a room without lying to herself. I'll let you know, I said. After I hung up, the street looked briefly like somewhere I had visited in a book once and forgotten to bookmark. I went home by a different route as if making a new groove in the city would make a new groove in me. The crabapple tree dropped another fruit with a soft, messy sound. The house smelled faintly of last night's rosemary. I opened windows to trade the air inside for the air outside and stood in the threshold while the trade happened. Just after 8, my email chimed. Petra had sent a brief note on letterhead that never tried to be pretty. Northbridge Advisors has concluded a preliminary investigation into policy violations by Ms. Mara Lang. Findings substantiate violations of Sections 6.3, 6.7, and 9.2 of the Employee Handbook. Employment has been terminated effective today. Access credentials revoked. Corporate property to be reconciled by end of week. See attached summary. The attachment was 3 pages long and read like a ledger dates violations exhibits. No flourishes, no opinion. It did not ask to be believed. It behaved as if belief were irrelevant. I printed it not because I needed paper, but because sometimes weight matters. The pages lay on my dining table like a quiet set of laws. I poured water instead of rye and drank it as if the body could be instructed into clean lines by the purity of a habit. The phone rang again. I let it ring once, twice, and picked up. Thomas Lang, a voice said lower and rounder than Evelyn's built for pews and basements. I wanted to say I'm sorry. You don't owe me that, I said. I owe you for not letting me find out from someone who enjoys sharing bad news, he said. Evelyn told me what you told her. We'll talk tomorrow when we can. Not to scold, to ask what part of her is drowning. You've always been kind, I said, and the sentence surprised me with how much I meant it. I was a warden at the county jail for a decade, he said. Kindness is the only thing that keeps doors from being the only language people speak. He cleared his throat. If you need me to vouch for your character, I will. I won't need that, I said, but thank you. When the line went dead, the house exhaled with me. I turned off the lights, then on again, as if a change in voltage could reframe the room. On the counter, 2 keys lay where we always tossed them after work, hers with the nick near the top, mine with the dull edge from an old lock. The habit tugged again key in the bow tie on the chair shoes side by side, and I let it tug without letting it rule. On Tuesday, Petra asked me to sign a brief statement for the file that I had initiated the report, that I had provided the screenshots, that no retaliation against Mara had occurred, that any client communication would be handled through counsel if it turned personal. I signed, and when I gave the page back, she held it between 2 fingers like a small, fragile boat. Thank you, she said. I know you didn't want your private life to pass through my office. I wanted it to pass through somewhere with rules, I said. There are worse preferences, she answered. Work filled the next hours the way sand fills a trench. I met with our site team to reallocate the Cascada deliverables to Priya, who had a spine like tempered wire and a calm that made calendars relax. We stripped the handoff meeting with roads development down to nouns and verbs. We removed names where names could cut. We kept every promise that belonged to the company and none that belonged to Mara. Late afternoon found me in the garage again, the concrete colder underfoot, the echo thicker. I drove without the radio and counted red lights like prayer beads, not because I'm a believer, but because repetition is a form of rest. At home, I opened the windows again. The air smelled like iron and distant rain. I made toast with nothing on it and ate it standing as if the act of not adding anything could balance a day that had added too much. When the mail slot clacked, I walked to the hallway and picked up a manila envelope with my name typed so precisely it looked drawn. Inside was a copy of the temporary orders Rowan had filed that morning, stamped by a clerk who had trained her hand to be invisible. Mortgage status quo, joint account transactions above a threshold, to be co-signed prohibition on disposing of material assets without notice, and a line about professional boundaries that felt as thin as a truce. There was nothing in it that made me feel triumph. There was, however, a small, measurable quiet that settled over the dining table when I put the papers next to Petra's report, as if the weight of them together exceeded the sum of their pages. I washed the one mug I had used that day and set it to dry on a towel. Then I sat in the living room where the lamplight turned the corners into corners again and the house into something almost legible. The streetlight outside made a clean circle on the road. A jogger went past with a rhythm that made sense to his body and no one else's. By 10, the neighborhood had given up its errands and rehearsals and become a place where sleep considered its options. I turned off the lamp. The dark arranged itself into the shapes of the furniture we had chosen together years ago. In the sound of the refrigerator and the far small thrum of the city, there was an outline of a future I didn't try to name. I lay back and let the quiet hold. The letter arrived with a clack of brass and a small rush of cool air through the mail slot. I was slicing an apple in the kitchen. The knife paused against the board as if the wood had a throat. The envelope was cream stock, with a name stamped on the back flap, Lachlan and Shore, a boutique practice that marketed itself as discreet. Inside, 3 pages on heavy paper. Demand for immediate reinstatement and damages. The phrases were composed to read like fate, wrongful termination, hostile work environment, sexual coercion. I read them twice, not because I didn't understand, but because the mind insists on re-entering absurdity to see if the furniture has moved. I called Rowan and read the bones of it into his voicemail. He returned the call before the kettle finished its slow complaint. Standard pressure tactic, he said, voice steady enough to press against. They're betting you'll negotiate with a cloud. We won't. Send me scans and the hard copy. I'll respond with exhibits and a reminder that married is married. Petra's report. In my inbox, he said, clean work, timelines align, policy citations are blunt without being theatrical. Judges like that. I placed the pages back in their envelope the way people cover mirrors after a death. The apple had browned where the air found it. I finished it anyway and tasted nothing. That afternoon, Petra knocked once and stepped into my office with her laptop hugged to her ribs. 2 of our clients received calls from Mara, she said. Rhodes Development and Hemlock Partners. The content was uniform. You're sabotaging her career. You're vindictive. Northbridge can't be trusted with confidentiality. How did they respond? Rhodes's office manager hung up and CC'd me on a summary of the call. Hemlock confirmed with me, directly asked for a written assurance about their files, and then asked politely how to refer any further personal contact from Ms. Lang. She's dialing the network, I said, and the words were tinny, even in my own mouth. Petra set her laptop on the corner of my desk and opened a window like a stage set. Timestamps, raw notes, names of receptionists bound into neat bullets. Rowan will want these, she said. The calls implicate business torts interference, maybe defamation. More importantly, they tell a story at hearing work has boundaries, and she's willing to ignore them. What do we do on our side? We tell the truth loudly, and once she said, I'll send a short advisory to client services if contacted by Ms. Lang regarding personal matters. Reply with, please direct all non-project communications to counsel. No embellishment. Thank you. Petra closed the laptop. I know this is a mess you didn't choose, she said. I also know you've done what policy exists to allow decent people to do when things go wrong. I'm not sure I qualify as decent, I said. You don't get a vote, she said, and left the door clicking into its frame as if it trusted wood. At 3:40, my phone chimed with a message from a number I didn't have. I'm Lila Mara's cousin. Evelyn gave me your contact. Do you have 5 minutes? The name surfaced vaguely from December holidays, a girl with sharp eyes and a laugh she kept in her pocket, like contraband. 5 minutes, I replied, and she called within 10 seconds. I'm not picking a side, she said, not bothering to invent a preface. I'm intervening before the family gets weaponized into someone's theater. Understood. She posted last night, Lila said. A long thing about escaping control and true self and a man who hid knives in spreadsheets. It has a lot of sympathy in the comments from people who like epiphanies. I asked for specifics politely. She blocked me and messaged Uncle Thomas to say I'm dangerous. Do you need me to refute anything publicly, I asked. No, she said. You don't put your hands in that machine. I'm telling you because patterns repeat until someone names them. In college, she told everyone a TA was obsessed with her. Turned out she'd been sending him poems at 2 a.m. and he'd asked her to use office hours. At her last job, she told my aunt her manager hated her because she was too brilliant. HR records showed 3 no-shows and a travel voucher used for a weekend with a guy from the gym. She's good at narratives that favor the room she's in. I appreciate you telling me, I said. I'm also saying be careful. Lila added the words, losing their brittle energy. She's hurting, and when she's hurting, she throws bottles into crowded rooms. I'll keep doors locked and document the glass, I said. Good, she said, and her breath made a little fog against the phone. Tell Evelyn if she calls. After we hung up, the office looked like it had been moved 2 inches to the left. I sent Rowan the client call summaries and Lila's note, short and factual. He replied with a line that read, like a diagnosis. We file for a limited protective order, re-workplace/clients. Emergency hearing possible. Thursday. I'll calendar it. The sentence sat on my screen with the calm of a stone. Thursday's courthouse coughed up its usual morning traffic probation check-ins. A landlord with a stack of grainy photographs, a kid with a skateboard he promised not to ride indoors. Rowan met me by the metal detector with a file folder thick enough to hold 3 small mistakes. His tie was navy and resigned. Judge Carlson, he said. Bench on the 5th. She's pragmatic. Give her documents and she'll measure them. Give her adjectives and she'll hand you a mop. I brought Petra's report, the order from yesterday, client emails, the demand letter from Lachlan and Shore. Good, he said. We're asking for a narrow order. No contact with your workplace. No direct contact with your clients outside counsel. No social media content that tags your firm or your name in a professional context. We're not asking for a blanket bubble around your life. Judges like narrow. We took the elevator in a silence that wouldn't embarrass either of us later. The hallway outside Carlson's courtroom smelled like coffee diluted by fluorescent light. A man in a reflective vest read a summons with his head bowed as if the paper were an altar. People call it a machine, this place, but to me it felt more like a mill. Everything ground to flour if you stood still. Mara arrived with a lawyer I didn't know, young lantern-jawed spectacles that wanted to be taken seriously. She wore a dark blazer and a blouse that belonged to a version of herself who never overslept. She looked smaller than the last time I saw her, as if measurements had been quietly reduced. We didn't greet each other. Rowan slid me into a pew behind counsel table with a view of the judge's bench and the clock above it that claimed time was square. Court convened. Names were called. A few matters cleared in a series of brisk thuds, continuances, stipulations, the occasional sigh. Then our case number, Rowan announced. The other attorney announced. We approached shoes making the low, obedient rasp carpet requires. Counsel Judge Carlson said, voice dry as vellum. Good morning. I've reviewed your submissions. Mr. Archer, you're asking for a temporary restraining order limited to workplace and client contact. Yes, Your Honor, Rowan said. There has been direct outreach by Ms. Lang to 2 of petitioner's clients containing statements that, if untrue, risk business relationships and professional reputation. There has also been a demand letter asserting claims we can address in civil procedure, not through ex parte pressure. The judge held up a hand. We don't try the defamation claim today, she said. We ask whether an order preserves the status quo without punishing speech protected by statute. Ms. Lang's counsel, lantern jaw straightened. Your Honor, this is a domestic dispute dressed up as corporate hygiene. My client reached out to friends and to a former colleague at 2 companies seeking support in a time of emotional crisis. She denies making false statements and denies any intent to interfere with business. Was she instructed not to contact clients directly, the judge asked. He hesitated just long enough to mark the moment. She was not instructed formally. Rowan opened a folder with the patience of a mechanic. Your Honor, he said, Exhibit C, Northbridge's Client Service Advisory, issued Tuesday afternoon, time-stamped advising all outside parties to direct non-project communications to counsel. Exhibit DHR's preliminary report, substantiating policy violations and documenting Ms. Lang's use of company systems for personal matters involving an active client. Exhibit E emails from Rhodes Development and Hemlock Partners, documenting the calls and registering concern about confidentiality and reputational harm. Carlson read quickly, lips moving a fraction. She made one note on the pad to her left. Ms. Lang, she said without looking up. Did you contact these clients? Mara's voice was careful, as if the floor grated away from her. I called to explain that that the situation wasn't what he was telling people. I was trying to protect myself. Protect yourself by calling his clients, the judge asked, head tilting a degree. Not friends, not family. I don't have many. Mara stopped. The lawyer put a hand near her elbow, not touching. Carlson set the exhibits aside. Mr. Archer, I can grant a narrow order. No contact with Northbridge's clients except through counsel regarding the ongoing divorce. No contact with the Northbridge workplace except through counsel or HR for purposes of property retrieval. No tagging of petitioner or his firm in public social media posts. The order will be for 30 days, subject to extension on a showing. Rowan inclined his head. That relief addresses our concerns. Ms. Lang's counsel, Lantern Jaw, tried to build an objection and seemed to decide the scaffolding would collapse. We'd ask that clients be defined by a list, so my client doesn't inadvertently violate a vague category. Provide a current client list to opposing counsel, the judge said. Use initials in the publicly filed order. I won't have your docketing system abused as a vendor directory. She signed with a fountain pen that made an audible scratch, and the clerk stamped the order with an authority that made the page feel heavier. Next matter, she called. In the hall, the air felt cheap. Rowan handed me a copy of the order already warm from the copier. The ink smelled faintly metallic. You handled yourself well, he said. I didn't do anything I said. You didn't. He agreed, and it sounded like a small gold star nobody would frame. Mara and her lawyer stood 5 paces away. She looked at the order in my hand the way you look at an X-ray you don't know how to read. You've turned everyone into a witness, she said. No, I said. I've turned facts into paper. Her mouth opened closed. The lawyer guided her toward the elevators with the choreography of someone who had learned when to leave rooms. Rowan waited while she went, then pushed the stairwell door with his shoulder. On the 2nd floor landing, he paused, hands in his pockets, and stared at a cinder block as if it contained a hidden door. I'll draft the response to Lachlan and Shore this afternoon, he said. We'll attach the order Petra's findings and a request that they preserve all communications. If they're making claims, they can make them with an index. I'll be at the office, I said. Don't talk to anyone about this who isn't your lawyer, your HR director, or your parents-in-law, he added out of habit. I won't, he nodded. Get some air when you can. Outside, the sky had the thin, hard color of a screen at 60% brightness. A food truck across from the courthouse sold coffee that tasted like a compromise but was hot. I stood at the curb and sipped while the city moved around its obligations. A man in a union jacket laughed and then immediately apologized to no one, as if laughter were a noise some rooms couldn't bear. I finished the cup and tossed it where other cups had gone to be forgotten. Back at Northbridge, Priya had anchored the Cascada file with a set of checklists that looked like the inside of a well-made clock. She briefed me on revised milestones, resource pulls, a column of risks that had been tamed into conditionals. I listened, gave small approvals, declined to pretend I was indispensable, and watched the room recalibrate around competence that wasn't mine. At 5, an email from Rowan slid into my inbox with the precision of a plane landing response sent. See attached. I opened the PDF and read the sentences that would now exist on a server in a basement somewhere. Petitioner denies all allegations. Attached exhibits AF. Respondent is on notice to preserve electronic communications, including all post messages and call logs related to petitioner and Northbridge advisors. The periods were full stops, not threats. The language didn't gloat. It simply existed. I went home by the long way, the one that kept me under eaves and past the library's stone lions. The crabapple tree out front had surrendered a dozen more fruit to the sidewalk. The small bruises looked like punctuation the street hadn't asked for. I swept them into a pile and bagged them not as metaphor, just as housekeeping. Inside, I opened a window and let the evening slide a thin blade of cool through the rooms. The phone rang at 7. Elijah Evelyn said, "We saw the order." "How?" Thomas called the clerk. She said sheepish for a second. Old habits. We're not rejoicing. We're relieved. There's a distinction. I know the difference, I said. She's not answering us, Evelyn added. If she contacts you, would you tell us? We won't intrude. I'll tell you. Thank you. A pause softer than cloth. Are you eating? Yes, I said, and didn't tell her it was toast again. After we hung up, I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room the way I used to when Mara told me about her day, and I let my body learn where to rest. The house wore its quiet like good wool. I put the kettle on and waited for it to hum. On the table, Rowan's response lay next to the order, and Petra's report, a small architecture of paper that held up the room better than any beam. I added a plate, a cup, a knife. The arrangement looked like proofs of a simple geometry given this. When the kettle sang, I poured and sat and let the steam catch my face. The street lamp blossomed in the window glass. Somewhere beyond the houses, the river turned its slow muscle under the bridges. I drank until the tea went lukewarm, then drank the rest anyway. By Friday, the order had settled into the office the way new furniture does. People walked around it without comment, learned its edges, stopped bumping their shins. I kept the copy Rowan handed me in my top drawer. The knowledge of it inside the desk weighed more than the paper itself. Rowan called early afternoon. We have movement, he said. Opposing counsel wants to talk numbers instead of nouns. What kind of numbers? The kind that end calendar reminders, he said. Come by. Archer and Bell's conference room had been reset since my Monday visit. No cookies, no flowers, just a carafe of water and a tray of pens like utensils. Across the table sat a different lawyer, a woman in a charcoal suit with spectacles balanced close to the bridge of her nose, and a manner that suggested she disliked momentum unless she could account for its source. Ms. Curzon Rowan said, counsel for Ms. Lang, she wasted no throat clearing. My client cannot afford litigation. She seeks a clean separation property, divided claims withdrawn, no ongoing obligations either direction. If we can structure something she can sign without feeling publicly flayed, she'll sign. Rowan nodded toward me the way you nod at a witness to confirm what's already in the record. We're listening. Curzon unfolded a single page, proposed sale of the marital residence within 60 days, net proceeds after mortgage and closing costs, divided 60-40 in Mr. Hale's favor. Ms. Lang keeps her personal accounts and her vehicle. Mr. Hale keeps the firm and all business assets, retirement accounts, and investments in his name. No maintenance either way. Both parties withdraw all claims, including Ms. Lang's employment-related allegations, with prejudice. And confidentiality, Rowan asked. Each side refrains from public commentary about the other's conduct beyond what's required by law or court order. Curzon said. No social media firebombs. No op-eds. No podcasts. If either party is compelled to speak, they speak in facts, and only the necessary ones. Rowan turned the page so I could read it the way he did upside down, as if the words should work no matter their angle. This is largely in line with our last conversation, he murmured. You comfortable? I am, I said. Comfortable wasn't precise. The proposal sat in the body like a room where the temperature matched your skin. Curzon adjusted her glasses. Ms. Lang requests one more line that corporate personnel records reflect termination for policy violations without elaboration. She understands there will be an internal file. She's asking not to be turned into folklore. Rowan considered. We don't write folk songs, he said. We maintain files. The letter will say exactly that and nothing more. Curzon clicked her pen once and made a small check. Then we'll draft the settlement and circulate. It happened faster than the dread had predicted. A listing agent with kind eyebrows staged the house as if people slept there who never argued. We boxed books, unhooked the framed maps, wrapped the lamp Mara found at a flea market in tissue that pretended not to remember. On the morning of the first open house, the crabapple tree dropped fruit in a pattern that looked like punctuation for a sentence neither of us had finished writing. 2 weeks later, an offer cleared contingencies with the crisp glide of an envelope pushed across a desk. Evelyn and Thomas came once on a Saturday to pick up a few boxes Mara had asked them to store. Thomas carried them out to his truck and returned for the last one alone. He set it down by the door and lowered himself onto the bottom step without permission or apology. You don't need me to say it, he said, but I will. We're sorry for where this went. It's not a ledger you owe me anything on, I said. We'll keep trying to be the sort of people our daughter can miss without resenting, he said. That's all we know how to do. Evelyn hugged me in the way people do who were not raised on hugging and adopted it as a second language, late gently formally with care for the vocabulary. If you have things with her name and don't know where to put them, she said, put them in our garage. We have a shelf labeled Miss Lang now. It seems practical. I smiled and it felt like a thing with a hinge finally swinging. The closing took place in a title office where the wall art tried too hard to have a sense of humor. I signed my name until it began to look like a word in a language I didn't speak. The agent slid me a check that represented my share after mathematics neutered the romance 60% of what remained after debts and fees had done their work. I folded it into a paper-thin rectangle and slipped it into the inside pocket where people in old movies kept letters. Rowan sent a short, unsentimental email, funds wired to trust. Settlement fully executed. See attached stipulation of dissolution for filing. The attachment was brutal in its precision. Names, dates, legal categories of failure and separation. The kind of document that would make a stranger assume we had handled our lives like adults. I read it once and then put it in a folder with the order and Petra's report. The folder didn't bulge. Paper is efficient at holding endings. The last night in the house, I slept on the floor with a folded blanket, not as a ritual, not as penance, just because the bed had been hauled away and the echo made furniture out of air. In the morning, I left both sets of keys on the counter, hers, with the nick near the top, mine with the dull edge from the old lock. I took a photograph not to revisit later, but to prove to myself that I had actually done this, put metal down on stone, and walked away. The apartment was a one-bedroom on a corner where buses sighed and a bakery opened before dawn. I unpacked by category, plates near plates, shirts near shirts. The couch came in through the window with the help of two men who did not gloat when the frame balked. The first night, rain hissed on the awning outside. The sound was so close it felt like weather had chosen me for company. I set the 3 documents, the order, the settlement, Petra's summary, on the bookshelf where a family photo might have gone, a small triptych that kept the room square. A week later, Rowan texted, final hearing Wednesday 9:30. Routine. Routine felt like a strange word for something that dissolves a decade, but the courthouse knows better than to make a pageant of ending. In Judge Carlson's courtroom, we sat with 3 other pairs and a man petitioning for a name change after a spelling mistake dated back to his christening. Mara appeared on a small screen from a conference room with poor lighting. The camera framed her too low and made the ceiling look heavy. Carlson confirmed identities, confirmed the executed agreement, asked if either party wished to be heard. Neither of us did. The judge signed, the clerk stamped. Carlson said, "Good luck to you both," in a tone that recognized luck's bad reputation. Outside the square had a wind that made coats logical. Rowan shook my hand the way people do who prefer competence to intimacy. "You're clear," he said. "Get the utilities squared and don't answer any late-night emails that pretend to be legal documents." "I won't," I said. He pointed his chin toward the coffee cart. "Do you want terrible coffee or real coffee?" "Real," I said. We walked to a place that sold the latter. He paid. We stood at a little metal table and learned briefly what men learn when air fixes their posture into something adjacent to ease, to talk about traffic, to point out a dog that looks like a punctuation mark, to nod at a delivery truck with awe as it threaded a gap that wasn't there. When we finished, he touched the rim of his cup to mine and then went back to the office to give other people their pages. Word travels through towns in lines you can't draw on a map. Priya left a card on my desk with 2 words, "Well navigated," and a list of milestone dates for Cascada written in a hand the project manager in me admired. Petra sent a 1-sentence email, "Personnel matter closed." Evelyn texted a photo of the crabapple tree taken from the sidewalk. Above it, the sky had the washed-out blue of a page that's been left near a window too long. That evening, I returned to the old neighborhood to drop a final envelope through the mail slot, forwarding info and note for the buyers about the way the back door sighed in a draft, the name of the plumber who understood our old pipes' personality. I stood on the stoop a minute longer than I needed to. The window of the front room reflected the street, and for a second, I saw a version of us moving inside the glass, 2 people locating the edges of a sofa, arguing about the angle of a lamp, negotiating where the rug should die under the coffee table. I let the reflection finish its little theater and then turned away. Back at the apartment, the bakery's night crew had begun the batch for morning, and the air smelled like yeast rehearsing its trick. On my kitchen table, the folder waited, obedient as always. I took out the settlement one more time and read the last page twice. Then I slid everything into a drawer and closed it until the wood met its mate with a small, exact sound. Near midnight, my phone lit with a message request from an unfamiliar name, Nora Whitcomb. The profile picture showed a woman standing in front of a chalkboard with a piece of green chalk in her fingers and the kind of smile you can hold. Rowan suggested I reach out. "If you're up for coffee, I know a quiet place near the library." The words arranged themselves without decoration. I typed back, "Coffee Works." The reply came as a simple timestamp, and then silence, the old city pressing its cheek to the window and listening to itself breathe. I turned out the light and sat in the dark for a minute, not to dramatize anything, only because darkness is a room you can share without conversation. The radiator clicked once as if a small agreement had been reached. Outside, a bus sighed and moved on. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.